Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aspect Reacts here on the Aspect Network. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Batts, and I'm flying solo today. Sean is otherwise occupied, having a great time at a film festival, and also happy birthday, Sean, if you end up watching this one. So this week, we're continuing our discussion watching through the first season of The Penguin. So we'll kick off this episode by combining my overall thoughts and favorite moments from the sixth episode of The Penguin titled Gold Summit. So this episode is, I think that Sean and I pretty much hit it on the head last week when we speculated that last week's episode and this week would be kind of a sort of take a moment to relax, calm before the storm, kind of let things settle, let all the major events that have happened in the season so far settle down and kind of get pieces in place, ramping up to then episodes 7 and 8, which I think that shows a lot of the time do this where like the final two episodes, especially if they have a shorter season, feel like a kind of two-part finale in a sense where like there's just a lot of things that happens in those, and I think that that's what we're going to get here. So this episode is again more of the like putting things, kind of having them unfold, and there's not a lot that happens in this episode, but it's definitely a like slower, there's a lot more intimate character stuff going on in this episode and things of that nature. I think, well, one, first off, we get to see Gotham covered in snow, which is amazing. This is finally where that, I don't know how that shot of, it's like one of the opening shots in this episode. It actually might be the opening shot in this episode. Came out like 4 or 5 weeks ago. Like I just saw it on Twitter and I just don't know where that came from or how that got out so early. But that's what we get with the beginning of this one. So we're moving into winter fully, which is super exciting to see. Gotham covered in snow always looks great. Seeing this version of Gotham covered in snow is awesome. And so love to see that. It's really cool. But beyond that, we get that kind of opening and we see that Penguin's operation has made really big strides as far as what their like their volume, like they had two of the kind of mushrooms to go on at first, and now they've got a handful, like they've got a ton now. We see that they've like really established their operation in the underground, which I think was definitely needed for them. So they've done that successfully, and we're kind of seeing them like running smoothly. Penguin's got a pretty good crew together. We see Victor is the person who was riding on the bike from the trailer last week, and they're using the tunnels pretty effectively and also like getting out of the way or not being followed into the tunnels. So like kind of Sophia and Maroni don't know that it's them doing that, which is crucial to their operation running as smoothly as it is right now. So we get that. We get more with his mother and her condition just worsening and her quality of life going down. We see Crown Point being, discarded and not looked after by Gotham. Like there's comments about the city, siphoning isn't exactly the right word, but like rerouting and prioritizing power in the rich neighborhoods and just, leaving the parts of Gotham that are the worst off to just kind of deal with it themselves. So we get that like hammered home. This was a big episode for Vic as well. He has one of my favorite moments, which I'll kind of talk about in a minute, but there's a lot of stuff going on with him. I think beside Oz, probably, it's tough. I was going to say beside Oz, he's my favorite character on the show, but then there's also Sophia, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of really cool things going on there. It's a lot of, I like that the show is taking the time to show us how Oz is able to build this kind of like empire that he's trying to, and these people that will support him despite the character that he is. And I think that this episode does a really good job of acknowledging that head on. Oz even acknowledges that straight on in multiple scenes. He's like very forthright about the type of person he is, the things that he's done, and he uses that to his advantage, which is really impressive. He's like, yeah, I did all of these things, but so what? And, is able to use that and present that in a way where people don't hate him for it, which is super impressive. Like, he's just such a good manipulator, and he just continues proving that over and over again. So that's a huge thing. We see Dr. Rush is still around and still, under Sophia's thumb, kind of. I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure who exactly is under whose thumb in that relationship, actually. Like, it feels very on the surface level that Sophia is the one who holds all the power in that dynamic now, but it also feels like that's kind of what Rush wants, and so maybe he is the one that's kind of actually in control in that situation. I don't know. I still think there's a lot that's interesting there. I do feel very, and I guess I'll talk about this more in the speculation, but I feel very good about my guess that the red light thing is going to come back in the future. But we'll talk about that in the next segment. But yeah, I think that the show one, just from a production standpoint, continues to be phenomenal. I think this episode is maybe, it's tough. I don't want to say that this is like maybe the strongest cinematically of the show, but I do think that it's. I mean, like they've all just been stellar. Honestly, I think that it was really cool seeing the shots on the motorcycle very much mirroring some of the shots from the motorcycle that we get in the Batman when Bruce is riding around as the Drifter and he's on his motorbike. You have shots that very directly parallel that, and so I think that that's a really nice touch there. Um, all of the sets are incredible. Like the underground set that they have for Oz's base of operations right now, it's fantastic. It feels so like lived in the sense that it feels like a real place. It feels like a place that is underneath the city that they're operating out of, and you can feel that. I think it's also impressive how much they make you feel cold in these environments, which I think is something that TV shows kind of struggle with sometimes. Not that, I don't know, it's an interesting thing because that's one of those elements that you can't make the audience feel like smell and like temperature, right? Like you can't actually get that across, like engage those senses with the audience because of the medium, right? Like I can't actually feel the coldness of the rooms and the stuff that they're in, but I think that the show does a really good job of still getting that across in the way the characters are interacting and reacting in the environment. The color grade on the episode reflects that too. Like it's a much more desaturated and just cool color to it, which like but it goes a long way here and it really helps seal that feel for the show, which I think is super stellar. So my favorite moments in this, I think I'd have to split it up into like the big, I was going to say the big three, because there's kind of like three, arguably four kind of big arcs that are happening in this episode. And one of them is like Oz establishing his criminal empire, the beginnings of what that will be, and how he is using the men that he has and what his plans are as far as like growing that, right, and making more money and securing more power. There's that plot line that's going on. There's Vic and his struggles that are happening, and then there's Sophia and her and Maroni's hunt for Oz and trying to stop Oz. And then arguably the fourth one, which comes in really importantly in the end of the episode, is the things that are happening with Oz's mother. And so I think honestly my favorite scene in two of my favorite scenes in this episode are both to do with Victor. And it's the first one when it's not the first scene that he's dealing with this, but the one that's my favorite when he's dealing with this is his dilemma, his problem with Squid. So Squid is the drug dealer that Vic had known in his, I'll say, past life before he started working with Oz. He's the guy that Vic was trying to steal Oz's rims for. And so he confronts Vic and is like, hey, like, what are you doing? Where are you getting this money? Who are you working for? Essentially, I want to work with them also. But we know that Vic is obviously not, or not Vic, we know that Squid is obviously a guy not to be trusted. And so Vic has this dilemma of like how to deal with this. He doesn't actually want to bring him to Oz, but Squid is putting him in a position where like he's not giving him a choice. And so you can kind of feel that, well, the solution to this problem is that Squid needs to die, right? Like that's what's going to happen. That's the easiest fix for it. And it's one of those things where it's kind of like you can feel that this is going to be the moment that Vic has to do this. And he does. Like, he tries to get out of it. He tries to just pay Squid off, and Squid just doesn't accept it. He throws the money back in Vic's face, and he's being really a dick about it, right? And he's like, you need to take me to Penguin now. And Vic's like, all right, dude, sure. And so they start walking, and Vic turns and shoots him, and the bullet actually hits him in. It doesn't even graze his neck. Like, it's in the side of his neck, but it just like, the bullet hits him in the neck, and the dude collapses, and Vic watches him bleed out, and he's reacting like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like, And I love, one, it's just an incredible performance. It's a huge character moment. Like, this is the first person that Vic has outright killed in cold blood. I think that maybe the dudes that he hit with his car a couple episodes ago might have died. Like, he might have killed them in that situation. But that's a very different, like, that's a life or death. Like, you're trying, that's not as a direct thing as this, whereas like he just straight turns and shoots. And I don't know if Squid is unarmed. We don't figure that out, but like he just straight up turns and shoots this guy in cold blood and watches him bleed out. And it's also someone that he's known for a long time, right? And so it's a huge character moment for him. And he is obviously very remorseful at first and goes through that. And then I love the bit where he's like, why did you make me do that? Like, why did you force me to do this? Which is just such a strong, like, and it sucks because it really does feel like that's the case. Like, there wasn't another option for Vic here, I don't think. Like, things would not, they only would have been worse had Squid been taken to the Penguin, and things could have evolved that way. Because, like, there's just no way that this dude doesn't ruin everything, right? And so I think it's a great character touch of him being like, why did you force me to do this? And like that anger that he starts to get. But obviously, this is a huge thing that's going to come, and it's going to hang over Vic for the rest of the season, and him just as a person. You see him struggling with it. He goes to Oz, and he's super quiet in Oz. It's also this is one of my other favorite scenes in the episode, when Vic goes to Oz after this, and he's not saying anything at first, but Oz is able to read it in him and in his expression and body language that Vic did kill this guy. And Oz comforts him in the way that Oz can, and it's a super dark moment and a really like not great thing. It's good in the sense that you're seeing Oz be comforting, but it's a very sinister thing in the sense that like Oz is like, it gets easier, and that can be read in a couple ways. That can be read in the way of like dealing with that, like the weight of having done that gets easier with time, but also, and I think the way that Oz means it more is the fact that he's saying killing people gets easier the more that you do it, which is not great. But both of those scenes, I think, were really strong and really big moments for Vic as a character, and then also his relationship with Oz, and that goes through. The other big things are, like I was saying, just Oz. Like, I love seeing Oz running his crew. I think it's great stuff. Like, it's just super, I don't know, it's just super entertaining to see him like walking around the place and like giving orders and like, hey, like, so and so do this, so and so we got that ready, like whatever. I don't know. There's just something super satisfying about that. So I love those moments. But then, of course, the speech that Oz gives at the end, the Gold Summit speech, which is what the episode is titled for, and bringing all of the various crime, not the crime, I mean, they are crime families kind of, but like the lesser crime families, right? And even me describing them as that is part of Oz's point. Like, that's what he uses to bring them together. It's all these crime families that are not the Maronis or the Gigantes, and so they're the ones that everyone else views as at the bottom. And Oz is like, hey, instead of fighting each other constantly, we have the most land, we have the most resources, actually. If we would just stop trying to kill ourselves for no reason, we can band together and take out the Falcons, the Gigantes, and the Maronis, right? We can be the ones that are running the city if we would just be smart enough to do that. And it's a great scene. And this is, again, where Oz uses the, like, because I forget his name, but one of the I think it's the triad leader. Like, it's like, everyone knows that you just betray everyone you work with. Like, you do all these things. And Oz is like, yeah, I did kill Alberto. Like, I betrayed the Falcons, yada, yada. But, like, so what? He's like, he basically is like, it's nothing worse than what you guys do anyways. Like, and I did it because it's what I had to do. Like, I'm just a kid from the East Side who's trying to prove himself, just like all of you. And he does the crack open of the beer, and like, you see all of the other members, crack open their cans, and it's this symbol, this signal that they are now going to be working together. And it's a huge thing. It now Oz is able to, not only does he have his own crew that he's managed to build up and have their respect, but he now is essentially the kind of de facto leader of all of the lesser crime families and gangs that are operating in Gotham, which really takes him to another level as far as influence that he has over the city. So that's a huge thing. Then the other thing that we're seeing in this episode is Sophia and Maroni's hunt for Oz and them trying to find Oz. And I think the scene at the beginning is really interesting when it's Sophia and Maroni in the kitchen. Maroni's a cook, and they kind of are just sharing the space together. It's a really interesting dynamic in the sense that this is Sophia and the person who she has been told and grown up her entire life is like the mortal enemy, right? And now they have this alliance and they're working together. And Maroni is like cooking in her kitchen and opened a bottle of wine from the cellar, right? And like they're sharing this meal. And it's just really fascinating stuff. It's incredibly nuanced performances across the board. I love the reaction of Maroni when he's just like dealing with and still trying to cope with the loss of his wife and son, and that like breaking through, and then just trying to like get down to business and figure out how they can strike at Oz, right, and formulating a plan there. And so I think that's a lot of really powerful stuff. And then as the episode progresses, they go through and are trying to find leverage on Oz. And Sophia's like, we don't have any leverage. Like, there's nothing we can use. They go and they break into Oz's old apartment and are like rummaging through it. Maroni finds the picture of Oz and his brother, and Sophia's like, oh, they're both dead. His mom is also dead. Don't know anything about his dad. And Maroni, in anger, is like, he takes everything from me and he has nothing. And yeah, and as far as they know at this moment, that is the case, right? So they're looking for stuff. Sophia ends up finding a picture of Eve that is in a drawer that Eve has at Oz's place, right? And so she's like, okay, this is the lead that she's going to follow to kind of get back at Oz. And this is something that we kind of saw coming. It had been telegraphed in earlier episodes with Eve, being very aware of and concerned about the fact that Sophia is probably going to come after her at some point because of her relation to Oz, right? This was her fear going through. And so you get that, and you get Sophia ends up finding Eve. But I do love the twist that like she finds Eve because Eve wanted her to be found. Like none of Eve's girls were going to tell Sophia where she is. The only reason that Sophia finds out where Eve is because Eve ordered Roxy to tell Sophia that to save them both in trouble. So I think that was a cool touch. But then the scene between them is just a really strong scene between these two women who have been doing what they have to do to survive and thrive in a world that is not, and in a city that is not made for either of them to do so. And the kind of back and forth and shifting in like dynamic and understanding and power in this situation is really it's incredibly well written, it's incredibly well structured and staged as far as using the physical space of the set and how the camera and the characters move through it and the emotion that's going on there and the kind of like suspense of you expect Sophia to go into this and to kill Eve at the end because Eve is like, Oz is not gonna, you can't capture me and use me as a thing that Oz is going to the detriment of himself. Like that's not the type of person he is. Like he will cut his losses, right? And so there's that, but then Eve is informed of the fact that Sophia is not actually the hangman. That's something that Oz withheld from her, which also, this is something I still don't, I'm a little bit fuzzy on the specifics of this because Sophia talks about it and has talked about it as if Oz knew that she was not, or that, see, I don't know, I guess that does make sense because Oz didn't think that she was the hangman and like went, but I think that Sophia thinks that Oz was more involved in the initial like pinning the things on Sophia. I don't think he was involved in like pinning stuff on Sophia. I do think that she's correct in the fact that he did like benefit from it after the fact and didn't do anything to correct that opinion when it came to Eve because, as Sophia says, that's an easier way for him to kind of manipulate her in a sense, right? And so in this scene, we get Eve learning that Oz did that, and that feels like a level, I mean, it is a betrayal of her trust and kind of manipulating her. And so you have that, and the whole dynamic between them and the scene is fantastic, and the kind of like suspense of whether or not Sophia is going to kill her, and she ends up not killing her. And after that, Eve does give Oz's location up. She says Crown Point by the zoo, and so now Sophia has that information, which is a huge thing. And so that then leads to what will be the final the final scene of the episode, where Vic is at the apartment that Oz and Vic and his mother are staying at, and the power comes back on because Oz had done some intimidation to one of the city officials to get the power turned back on in Crown Point, which was also a great scene in itself. Just great like dynamics there. But the power gets turned back on, music starts playing, Vic and Oz's mom are dancing in the room, and you hear like a door being broken open, and Vic does not go investigate, which is a gigantic rookie mistake on his part. But he doesn't go and investigate, and we see that ends up being Sophia standing there with a crowbar, and she sees Vic and also Oz's mom alive, right? And so now she has this leverage over him that she's been searching for in meeting. So that's how the episode ends. Yeah, I mean, it's great stuff. It's a fantastic show. It continues to be a fantastic show. But all that said, I think those are my main points. It's not that not a lot happens in the episode, because, I mean, a lot does. But like I said at the top, it's kind of more condensed and more focused in a kind of not, I don't know, some of the things don't happen, but it's a really a kind of more chill episode, sort of. If it sounds weird to say that about this, considering the things that do happen, like do get shot in the neck and a bunch of stuff. But yeah, that's the episode. Those are the overall thoughts and my favorite moments. And we're going to be taking a quick break, but whenever we come back, I will be speculating some future casting for the final 2 episodes of the season. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Aspect Reacts. So before the break, I discussed some of my favorite moments from tonight's episode of The Penguin, and to cap off this episode, I wanted to discuss what I think is next for the final 2 episodes. So I think I'm going to sound like a broken record in the fact that I don't really know that much. Like, we, of course, got the like next time on the Penguin thing, and we can see that Penguin does get apprehended by Maroni and Sophia, and is going to be tortured, presumably. We also have to assume that his wife, or not his wife, his mom gets captured, right? He's like asking where his mother is. So we see that. We obviously know that by the end of this episode, she's going to get apprehended by Sophia. I'm really curious about what happens to Vic as well in that altercation, in that exchange. So yeah, I mean, for next week, obviously dealing with the immediate fallout of his mom being captured and Vic presumably as well. And what is kind of going on there and what's happening there. Besides that, though, like I don't know, man. I mean, we have 2 episodes left, and I do still feel confident in the fact that I think Oz will have his empire by the end of this. I do think he will somehow manage to find a way to get out of this situation next episode. I don't know what the specifics of that will be or how that kind of can work. But I do think that'll happen. So yeah, I mean, but besides that, like I feel like there's still the clip. Maybe I'm just blanking out, but I feel like there was a scene in one of the trailers that was like Vic on the street asking someone if they like wanted more to life than whatever, and that might have just already happened, and I just totally am blanking on seeing that in a previous episode. But I've been like kind of waiting for that moment, and we haven't gotten it. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, so obviously Oz being captured. Presumably, this is what I mentioned earlier with Julian Rush and the fact that he, in this episode, had said that if Sophia gets her hands on Oz, to let him know, and he would be willing to help in whatever ways he can. And I assume that this is talking about some of the stuff that he would do at Arkham. And so this is why I think that the red lights thing is going to come back again. I don't know exactly how, but I feel pretty confident in that. So that'll be something to see, and seeing that kind of dynamic work out. Yeah, but I don't know how Oz is going to get out of that, which I think is really interesting. And I also think that it'll be something to see with what happens to the alliances that Oz just formed this week. Like how that will, I have to imagine that that'll somehow be how Oz is able to get out of it, right? Like the fact that he's just made this major play and now is in trouble. They might help him, but I don't know. We'll see. But as for next week, I think that the big focus will be Oz kind of in their clutches and trying to figure out a way to get out of that. And then I guess the following week would be All Out Gang War. Also, it's super interesting. We've now seen kind of it's rumor right now, but it's being rumored that Sophia will play a prominent role in the Batman Part 2, which would kind of fly in the face of what Sean and I had been speculating, that it would be difficult for her to make it out of this season alive. And Oz also have his empire in place. So I think that it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next 2 weeks. But yeah, I don't know, man. I love that I don't really know how these final 2 episodes can play out, except for what the little preview thing shows me at the end of the episode. I think that's an incredibly impressive thing for the show to be able to pull off, where like for basically most of the season, we've been like, I have a vague idea of what's happening next week and where we can go, but for the most part, uncertain. I think that is really, really impressive and really exciting to feel from a show, just like not knowing how things are going to go. It's keeping you guessing, and it keeps you engaged, which is super cool. This show is just, it's continuing to fire on all cylinders and being a phenomenal watch every week. So very excited for the next 2 weeks and excited to see how they go across the finish line with this one and wrap things up to kind of lead into, because the other exciting part about this is that whatever happens at the end of this will be leading into the status quo of things for the Batman Part 2. Something I do want to talk about briefly, I guess, I see a lot of posts about like, what is Batman doing during the events of the Penguin? Like, why is this dude not involved? And like, I wonder how the Batman Part 2 is going to explain like his absence. And I just don't think it's that big of an issue, actually. Like, this is all happening on a super condensed timeline. It's like 2 weeks maybe at this point so far, maybe 3, I guess. And like, that's not that long. And also pretty much everything that's happening doesn't really need Batman's attention. Like, the biggest thing that happens is all of the Falcones being murdered, and that is then like, okay, one less problem Bruce needs to deal with, right? Like, it's just the families, the like crime families taking themselves out. The only thing that he could start getting involved in is like literally this week a new drug has hit the streets like en masse, and so like in the form of Bliss. So like maybe he could be investigating that now at this point, but like I don't think there's anything in the show that really calls for his attention or his need to be there. Like, it's all real ground level. Not that Batman hasn't been operating at ground level in this universe, but like it's like super ground level, underground, like just infighting among the crime families that he doesn't necessarily need to get involved with. So like, I don't think there needs to be an explanation as to why he's not around. There's even in, I think, either the first or second episode, they mentioned that he's kind of been like MIA in Gotham, like people haven't been seeing him around. And so one explanation for that could be, which we know that Reeves is fond of No Man's Land. It's pretty obvious from the way that things have been going with the state of Gotham and kind of the disrepair of a good portion of the city because of the events of the first film, creating a sort of semi-No Man's Land thing and feel in Gotham. In the comic No Man's Land, Batman is missing for at least weeks. I believe it's a couple months, though, at the start of the No Man's Land event, because he is off as Bruce Wayne trying to get aid from the government itself to be like, help my city. And so that could definitely be something that Bruce is doing at this point in time, because at the end of Batman, he realizes that being Bruce is also important and that he probably should use his money a little bit more responsibly, and like his status as who he is in the city to like help the city as Bruce Wayne as well as Batman, like realizing that just being Batman is not enough. And so I think that's something that could also play into why he's not around here. Like, he could just literally not be in Gotham at this point in time, which I think would make sense. But yeah, I just don't. I've seen a couple of posts about that are like, oh, this is a big glaring thing, kind of like bothers me, and I don't agree, and I don't think it's really that big of a problem. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. He's not showing up in the show. Like, there's no way he shows up in next week or the finale. It's not going to happen. So yeah, I think that those are basically my speculation, my future thoughts on the next 2 weeks. And to wrap that up, that is the fact that I am not entirely sure what's going to happen for the next 2 weeks, besides, again, what the little next week on the Penguin trailer can show us. So yeah, super exciting. Thank you everyone for tuning in to The Aspect Reacts The Penguin. You can find me online at the Alex Batts, that's BATTS, on both Twitter and Instagram. Of course, please be sure to subscribe here to The Aspect on YouTube and any platform where podcasts can be found. Follow us on Twitter/X, Instagram, and TikTok at The Aspect Co. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.